Sounds good. Good morning. Um, Welcome to Challenge 3, which is what defines success in digital accessibility. I'm Jean Spellman. I'm one of the editors on the WCAG 3 project, and I'm also one of the original leaders on the project that eventually became WCAG 3. So I've been deeply involved in accessibility standards since early 2008. And I think a lot about defining success, or think about success and how to define it. So before we go too far into the flipped classroom, I would like to get your permission, and this actually was a request from Carl, to get the permission of everyone to ban the definition of success in digital accessibility as every person with a disability has full access to all digital information and processes. This is a lofty goal, and we absolutely should be striving for it. But as a definition of success, it has failed us. And a great deal of damage has been done with this definition to all sides. But as usual, the people who have suffered the most have been the people with disabilities. Perfect is the enemy of good, is how I like to think about it, and how I mostly hear it described. In the standards area, I've seen many proposals or language that would have provided important improvements to people with disabilities. I've seen them sunk because it wasn't providing perfect access to all disability groups. And that's where I get passionate about that definition. So perfect is the enemy of good also applies to accessibility standards. I listened to an AXCON presentation in 2023 by Jutta Treviranus on preparing accessibility for the future and the present. And one part of this excellent talk changed and focused my vague dissatisfaction with accessibility standards. She asked, what if Machiavelli didn't want web accessibility to succeed? And I would like to paste that link. Is there a way? Actually, no, I don't dare touch anything now. Paste the link into this Zoom chat. But Rochelle, do you think you could get it into either the Slack or? This is a PDF of her presentation. I highly recommend that you read slides, at least pages 6 to 17. And some of her bullet points that resonate with me that I think are critical to this discussion. You know what? I completely forgot that I wanted you to introduce myself before I started into this. Okay, all right. That we prioritize an impossible strategy, that it requires compliance by every author instead of a few companies to build accessible tools. It requires understanding difficult technical requirements and motivation by all possible authors. It entrenches WCAG in legislation, which requires simple, static, testable criteria serving a group that is highly diverse and variable. We're selling a techno-solutionism with a myth of a fix so the problem can be dismissed. We have formulaic tests irrespective of context. And then certainly what I've seen over many years of standards work is favoritism. There is a competitive process for including requirements. There's divisiveness built in by the exclusion of underrepresented groups. We most often talk about low vision and cognitive disabilities, but hearing disabilities are also very underrepresented. It is a meritocracy as a justification of an internal hierarchy. A, AA, AAA. Is your block important enough to make A, or are you a AAA? So these are some very thorny problems in defining the success in digital accessibility. And some of them are rooted in the nature of disability. Every person with a disability is an individual with individual needs. Indeed, one of the first problems in defining success is categorizing the disability types. Many groups have tackled this over the decades, and one of the more interesting efforts has been the Digital Accessibility Framework from the Accessible Community. They took work that had been sketched out for some of the early WCAG 3 work, and they built a robust framework for categorizing disability needs. It's in the public review phase, and I encourage you all to look at it. There's a presentation here on this, here at Access U tomorrow. Michelle, do I have the right evaluating digital content for accessibility using the Digital Accessibility Matrix? Tomorrow afternoon, okay. We also had a few other research submitted, which wasn't terribly relevant, unfortunately. So that's why Corb and Carl and I did some more research on things that we thought were more relevant. We found some research on different metrics for evaluating accessibility, research work that was done back in 2011 timeframe. We included a paper that I will, in full disclosure, I wrote about, or co-wrote, on how we could apply that research from 2011 to the WCAG 3 work. So I've included that in the readings, which I think is relevant. And Carl, Corb, and I, we've been looking at some of these problems, and we picked out some issues that we thought were most interesting and relevant to this topic. So now that I've been talking for far too long, go ahead, Corb.
I disagree. So I'm for right now I'm a director on Level Access Thought Leadership Team, and so both as a 6 foot tall blind person myself, but also as somebody with a chronic kidney disease, I think accessibility has certainly obviously been very core to my my work. But really, a lot of the focus that I have seen in the years that I've been working in accessibility, about the last 15 years, both as a designer, content person, developer, QA, someone who stood up teams, tried to figure out how do we solve accessibility at the enterprise, it comes back to these metrics and defining a successful accessibility program. And so often, I think disability advocates say, well, you can have a fully compliant website that's not used. To which, and I've said this a couple times this week, to which I say, then you don't have a fully compliant website. I can always find you a reason to fail a WCAG criteria if somebody can't use your website. Meaningful sequence is a really easy one. Name role value, very easy, right? You can find a lot of things that fit in those two categories alone. And then I think we think about like semantic structure, right? Almost anything can fit in semantic structure. So it's not that the standards themselves are the problem, right? It's that we have this great line. It sounds good, but it's not really helping us move success forward. When we tell execs like, well, yeah, you can meet all the standards, but then we still have to work on accessibility and still spend $6 million next year. What? I don't understand. If I meet all the security standards, I get a SOC 2 Type 2 certificate and I'm done. Right? Yeah, I know somebody can still like steal a password, someone can still hack in. We have to keep working on security. We're not going to be done, but we hit a line. And I think we've all, as accessibility advocates, been too scared to define that line. But I think the other side of the coin is that when we think about accessibility metrics, I wonder what models we can borrow from to make our work have a finish line that makes sense. Can we look at security? Can we look at privacy? Can we look at other models like that? And can we be willing to take some credit for the work that we've done? I think it's easy for us to point fingers and say, those SEO, search engine optimization people, they can say they got 35% more clicks this week because of the work they did. Was it really that? Or was it the ad campaign that led me to Google the company, that led me to find the ad that happened to click through? I've been looking at the same Facebook ad for the half-day premium garment for weeks. I've been Googling over it, but I don't want to spend my own $200 on it. So, right, but actually I might not. So can we really blame the SEO guy for the reason that worked, or is it the Facebook ads person? Well, it's both. But yet both of them are gonna be willing to take some credit for someone clicked my Facebook ad, therefore I'm gonna say they increased sales by 35%. So with accessibility, maybe we can't say 35% increase, although I did see somebody put that on a resume once, for a major corporation. That they were the reason that sales increased by 35% for the year for this Fortune 100. Good luck. But I think that the thing we can look at is, we talked about this very briefly yesterday. Can we look at conversion metrics? Can we look at abandoned carts on an e-commerce site, right? I put things in the cart, I never check out. Do I not check out because I can't check out? Maybe. Maybe there's lots of other reasons that I didn't finish checking out, like the laundry was done and my dog was barking. But at the same time, right, we can find some correlations there. I'm sure there are other models we could borrow from other metrics. We've got some ideas that we can certainly talk through today. And so excited to talk through all these things with you. We think about what it means to define success. We've got 4-ish questions? Three questions.
Yep.
3 questions to kind of guide some of our discussion today. And I'm gonna make one request. I'm gonna ask that we not raise hands. You're welcome to raise your hand. But as the guy walking around with a microphone, who's a blind guy, you're only gonna get exercise. So if you would just say your name, and then we'll bring the mics around. And so if there's multiple people, we'll go in order.
I like one.
Barb, it's Peter, I have a request.
Yes, Peter.
Everyone can go around and just, everyone say,
Name.
identify themselves, so we know.
Right over here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds great.
I'm Peter.
And that's Peter over there, and we'll start over here. That's the microphone around.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Michelle Bradley Montgomery, one of the co-chairs of the Accessibility Guidelines Working Group, and mentioned that I'm passionate about digital accessibility.
Randy Horwitz, I work at IBM as a senior technical staff member. I've had my hands on accessibility for quite a while, in a few different roles. I've been an internal consultant, helped shape strategy, a bunch of different things, looking forward to participating and describing for Michelle.
Yep.
Nope.
I'm representing the International Association of Deaf Professionals, but I'm also an consultant working with large companies in integrating accessibility. I've been really facility now for over 20 years. And hi, I'm Nicola Tavares. I'm the president. The director of the Design Research Center, and previously together with Jean, we were offering for accessibility guidelines. Working with
Yay.
Hi, I'm Monica Ackerman, and I was up until recently the head of accessibility at Scotiabank, one of the big 5 banks in Canada, and I'm currently in semi-retirement and figuring out what to do next.
Great.
Peter.
Thank you, I'm Peter Slayton. I specialize in customer design and customer service design and delivery in the hospitality, mostly in the hospitality industry, but wherever I'll be at. So I'm thinking around the edges of web accessibility, digital accessibility. I'm just dropping in.
Thank you. I'm glad you're here. There we go.
I think this table was just the interpreter. Oh, all right. Interpreter's our last person. All right.
So, sure. We had, after going through the research we had and found, we discussed some of the key issues. We came up with a list of about 7 things that we thought would be important to talk about. And so we picked the 3 that we liked the most, Corb and I, because Kyle, we kicked him out. So we said, his opinion doesn't matter here. So we're going to pick the ones we like. So the first one I picked because this is a really thorny problem that we have in WCAG 3 is, should different disabilities be treated equitably? For example, hearing disabilities are primarily covered in WCAG AAA, which is rarely followed. Experts generally agree that blockers are bad, but cognitive disability blockers are typically cumulative. and not a single point of failure. So the fatigue factor becomes a blocker, but that's not a single failure. So how do we include that in a system that prioritizes what to fix? So that's going to be the first one we're going to work on. I'll tell you the others just to, so everyone knows. Should we be aiming for perfection in disability? In WCAG 2, as long as there's a single failure, the entire page and the site fails. Is this reasonable or even desirable? Does it really make sense to tackle all the critical accessibility issues first? And then the third one, actually, you know what? We cheated here. 2 and 3 were separate questions, and we combined them because they were so close. I should have smoothed out the sentence structure there. And then our final one, which I hope we will have time to get to, with so many teams focused on design systems, should we see those as a panacea for accessibility when that means users don't see the results for years and struggle through inaccessible experiences in the meantime? How do we balance those competing business development demands of old tech debt? So,
Easy questions, so we'll answer in about
Yep.
10 minutes.
and of course, we can also branch out as people want to, and we can put items in the parking lot, or we can put these in the parking lot and go on to something more that the group wants to do. So let's start with the first one, which is treating different. How do we treat? And probably it isn't just do we, but how do we treat different disabilities equitably? Because we obviously should. But what we have in the present developed out of a very serious need for people who are screen reader users to be able to use the web. And that was the dominant audience pretty much for WCAG 1, and certainly was a very heavy part of the original WCAG 2.0. And later, people began to say, but what about, but what about me? What about low vision? What about cognitive disabilities? And I forget when it started, but I think it was like 2010, the W3C started a cognitive disability task force just to work on cognitive disability issues. And in 2.1, they got very few new success criteria. There were, I forget the numbers now, but there were a lot of new success criteria added in 2.1, and I think it was something like 3 or 4. And I personally know that the Cognitive Accessibility Task Force filed over 50 requests for success criteria that they could show from their research where it was needed, but it couldn't get into WCAG 2. And so that's part of how WCAG 3 started, is we said, we've got to be able to have a more flexible structure, and a way of defining success is part of that structure, to include the needs of people with disabilities who have been underserved. And Rochelle can tell you, we have had so much trouble with that. And it's, so a good, important starting point is how do we do an equitable distribution of disability needs?
And I think we can really add to that too. We think of something like as straightforward as videos, right? Okay. So we need captions. Captions burned into the video don't really help deafblind folks. So they need to be dynamic captions that are kind of on top, layered on top, right? So we say, well, we need audio description for blind people. And that's where we stop. But the WCAG 3 says, or sorry, WCAG 8 says, let's have a descriptive transcript. Descriptive transcript helps everybody. Also helps our SEO friends, right? But it's actionable. And so we'll end up with this confusion of, we actually have a requirement there that would solve the needs of more users. It's cheaper for the companies to produce, but we're not treating disability equitably in the sense that, well, it's not really a video anymore for a blind person if I have to read the transcript. It's not really a video anymore if I'm a deaf person and I'm looking at captions. Instead of looking at captions, I'm looking at a transcript. Right? Those are very different experiences. So I think that when I think about this question, for people who maybe think about things at like more practical level, that to me is one of those examples of what does it look like to treat disability equity?
And you know what? I think what's gonna work, Forbes, I should switch, let's switch microphones and
Oh,
let me run them.
Either way.
Because because I just noticed people raising their hands, even though you said aye.
Yeah, so let's not do raised hands to make things equitable for everyone. That's okay. I mean, you're welcome to raise your hand. Yeah, yeah.
What we don't talk about in videos is the benefit it can give people who have trouble interpreting facial expression and body motion and humor and other things we have added in a descriptive and explanation for implied content or interpreted content. So that's not something that you come to the table in conversations around video support. And I think there's a lot of those exemplars for positive.
Yeah.
There's an essential flaw in our addressing ability, because I tried to express it in that one point where, we're creating a, standard that is intended to be, I mean, it's designed to be a one size fits all to some extent, right? And we were saying this type of website will meet everybody's requirements. But what we're talking about is this hugely diverse group of individuals who, where there's frequently also conflicts between what works for me will not work for you, or will actually create barriers for you. I mean, there's not many of those, but there are some situations where that's the case. And so that also pits people against each other, and the requirements of one person against another person, not just in what is prioritized or what is determined to be the success, but also in terms of the design. So one of the other political things that has come into this is the appropriation of personalization by the overlay companies who are using it to for the snake oil that we talked about yesterday. But in fact, unfortunately, what's caught up in that snake oil is this notion of a more flexible, personalizable design for diversity approach, where each person, a sufficiently adaptable system, web system, that allows you to customize, personalize the web to what you want. That was to some extent Tim Berners-Lee and the HTML, XML history of the web. The intention there was that with things like cascading style sheets and all of those, it was intended to be something that you could re-render. Like HTML, it was write once, render in many, or present in many ways. But because of the commercial history, the capitalism, and the attempts to copyright own, make proprietary a lot of the things, that it lost a lot of its adaptability and flexibility, unfortunately. I think accessibility was what kept it most adaptable and flexible. So rather than pitting one group against another, is there a way that we can push on the greatest flexibility and adaptability and control by the user of the web regarding how we're going to render the thing? So can we push on the greatest flexibility of rendering, including that whether it's a transcript or a caption? And I completely agree with Jean in terms of how do we, what does the author do, or what does the content creator do? That there are some issues there to resolve.
So I want to pause you for a quick second, Yuta. You were talking about where, in addition to kind of this idea of how we personalize the web and maybe keep things flexible and adaptable, you also started by mentioning that maybe there are places where one disability's needs outweigh or kind of conflict with another disability's needs.
Can you give us an example or two of where you see that happening?
Iconic and visual representation that's best for you as opposed to text. And then you have someone who is dependent on text for the audio. Or, yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
bump up against each other, but yeah, color contrast. There's a number of them, which if we had the adaptability and flexibility, we could write once and render multiple times. I mean, back in SGML days, when SGML and XML were created, it was quite, you could do very different presentations of the same author content.
Yep, excellent. Thanks.
I'm sorry, I have to excuse myself. I have to take a call from my.
Yeah, no problem. Hang on, I'm going to switch microphones so we don't have a conflict going here. Okay, I want to make sure we're back on captions. Yes. Okay, great. We're having a microphone switch. Monica.
What I've experienced in implementing accessibility in the organization is people conflate all the time as to accessibility standards. They generally, understand that it's about disabilities, but most of the examples and the conversations and the experiences and the testing methodologies end up using examples of just screen reader. And so, we'll often hear people say, my application is JAWS compatible. And every example, well, give me an example of why we need to do something. Then the examples that tend to proliferate and come to the top are, well, if someone uses a screen reader, then you do this and it is fixed. So I think we're also missing rich examples across disability set experiences that people can use to talk about why WCAG matters and why a particular criteria should be implemented and the impact on users. And there just isn't that much. It's just so easy to fall back on, and the screen reader will say this.
Who else? And our friends online too, feel free to jump off. Do we have anyone? Feel free to jump off mute if we do have anyone. Oh, we had someone earlier. Apparently not. We might have some videos off, is why we're not seeing them. Who else? Peter, coming to you.
Thank you. I think one thing that, or maybe even two things that seem to be left out of all these discussions around the creation of standards and is our first is what are the user's expectations of what we can actually perceive on a website, how well we can use it, and the other is how well we're trained to use, whether it's JAWS or any other accessibility engine, usability screen reader or something else, magnifier. And for those who do not need a screen reader or magnifier, what are their expectations of how much they'll be able to use a website? Whenever I go to the web or to an app or whatever, some part of me wishes I could perceive the whole thing and get it perfectly, but I've long relinquished that expectation to just say, I want to find what I need to know. And that's, I think the most important thing is that we know that every website, every web page comes with lots and lots and lots of things. And we, of course, we all have everyone using that web page will have something different they want. But what are the means to get us to that point, and what are we trained to do so that we can actually just go there and do what we need to do without and I know the accessibility standards are all designed to help us do that, but where's the training that we need to maximize that, what's been done to give us that? And who's responsible for that training, and how do you, behind the accessibility standards, the creation of the standards, get the word out to not just developers, but actually the community of users who want to know what it is you've created for us so that we can actually use it.
One second, Pina. Let me get the microphone over to you for captions. That's okay.
Thank you. This is Pina. Peter, I wanted to pick up a little bit from where you left off, because I think the education, the training of the user, and the expectation of where they are and how they interface with the digital environment is so important and is too often left out. Couple that with bandwidth, couple that, so the actual access, hardware, what they use, right? The speed in which they can, navigate across. And then add to that, on top of that, the load. So, even as a screen reader user, to your point, you get all of these pop-ups and distractions and this constant overload of noise that is so unnecessary at times from the user experience, that then leads to fatigue, confusion. So you don't necessarily start by having, quote unquote, a learning disability or ADHD condition or whatnot, but it's not uncommon that if you're dealing with one disability, you're dealing with at least 2 or 3 disabilities at the same time. And I think that there's a big gap in really understanding the disability user journey and the impact, the way that these websites are designed on the user.
So I wonder then what we do with that as a basis for thinking about how do we treat disabilities more equitably. Peter talked about training. Pina talked about maybe an understanding of how multiple disabilities can fit into this. Other thoughts? I wonder some about, are there other instances where you feel like there may be a limitation in the guidelines? We've talked some about cognitive, but are there other limitations as well that we haven't considered that maybe we should bring in awareness, at least to this group, bring in awareness? Yeah, Pina, you want to? Yeah.
So again, I go back to the disabilities. We talk about sight, we talk about hearing, we talk about what about those people who need to use just simply their eyes to navigate, right? People who have very, very limited physical motion or mobility and use other ways, brain, kind of things. This is the tomorrow. This is today, and this is the tomorrow, right? Often they're not consulted. Often they're completely left out of this whole conversation, right? So I think that, we can't. I've done accessibility long enough, like many of us have, that we can't have a one solution fit all. It's just impossible. But I think having diversity in the way that we do things to understand the user journey is the big thing. And I like this concept of putting the choice on the user side of things. I want a simple, just text only. I don't want pop-ups. I don't want this. I turn them off. Period. End of story. That's just the way I want to experience things, right? I'm looking to do a bank transaction. I want to pay a bill. I don't want to be, bombarded by ads about, do you have money to invest in? Well, like really, I just want to pay a bill, right? I think I think a lot these days about the smartphones and the phones and the evolution of mobile phones. The idea of phones was to make a call, right? You made a call, then we said, okay, let's be able to use it for messaging. Okay, we'll add messaging. And now your smartphone is everything, but the principle of making a phone call has become so complicated. Like, was it not supposed to be a phone to begin with? Right?
I think what we're missing as well in the way that we've constructed the guidelines and the success criteria is the actual experience or the actual process of doing things. So we have these fragmented micro criteria for what you need to do, but no real thought to how does it all fit together? How does one flow? I mean, other than perhaps the focus path, but that's not adequate to think about, how do you, how many steps do you have to get to a function? I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that even if we were to stick with the design of the guidelines at the moment, that we could be thinking about that make the whole process more effective and usable for someone, understandable, etc. But so we've done the pieces, we haven't done the process.
That's kind of, am I hearing you right, Yuta? That kind of gets at that cumulative aspect of cognitive. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And my thought based on what Pina, what you were saying too, right, is I think there's also the practical element. I think a lot of us would enjoy a web experience with fewer ads. And I wonder if it's really the presence of ads that we find annoying, or if it's the accessibility of the ads we find annoying, or maybe it's all of it. But the distraction of it, right? But also from the, if I put on my capitalist hat, right? The desire for, well, I just want to do this thing and then get out, right? Is a direct competition to what that organization is wanting us to do. And so how do we make sure that we write guidelines that are testable, that meet the needs of somebody who maybe is overstimulated for whatever reason in that moment? Could be cognitive, could be screen reader, could be I just got back from 4 hours of going for barbecue. But that I want to make sure too that we have an equitable experience, not just a special experience. Anyone? Yeah. I'll come back to you, Pina. But there's other thoughts? Randy. Yeah. Randy?
Here, gotcha. So a couple thoughts. I like the idea about thinking about rendering differently. So I think it makes sense. And I also like, well, maybe I'm biased because I think in use cases. So what's the whole journey for different users? But has anybody asked, how do we define equitable? Like, what does equitable really mean? Does equitable mean I get in and out as fast as I need to? Maybe that's equitable for one person. And maybe I'm not usually philosophical. Maybe I'm throwing philosophical sand in the gears. But maybe to you, it's I want to see all the ads. So what does equitable really mean here? I think is an important question. And I realize that's a really deep philosophical-ish kind of thing, which usually isn't my style. But when we say equitable, what the hell does that mean? Pardon my language. I don't know. That's why I'm asking. I wish I had the answer.
Peter, did you have a thought? Did I hear you saying something? Got it. Yeah, equitable means something to each of us. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thanks, Randy. Who else? Oh, Monica. Yeah. You got it. All right. Yeah, yeah. We'll hand the little mic around sometimes.
And on. Yeah, coming to use, ease of use and the whole picture. I think one of the pieces that it's complicated when you're trying to implement WCAG is the end-to-end experience, like the customer experience. And in virtual service delivery, there are also a lot of, you're moving from one place to another, but you also have an opportunity to move from one kind of interaction to another. And you might be, start with a chat bot, and then you're moving into an online forum, and then you're moving into a real person interaction. And so how do you then, like, where does WCAG fit into all those pieces, and where are those drop-off points in the experience? That if you're just doing strictly regulatory, or that's what your organization wants, have we conformed to WCAG? Well, sure, up to this point, but then many people's experience just drops off into nothingness. And so I wonder how do we deal with that in thinking about success?
Your last thought there, Monica, is ringing around my head. I feel like there's a lot in that last sentence of somebody's experience disappearing into nothingness.
Yeah.
One of the things I saw some time ago was a cartoon of equity. And it's the classic picture of the family trying to look over a fence to watch a ball game. And there's the father can see over the fence, and one of the kids, I think, can't see over the fence, but he's pretty tall. And then there's a little kid who can't see over the fence at all. And Equal is giving everybody a box to stand on. So the father stands up even higher. The middle kid can see, but the little kid can't still. And then Equity is giving the little kid 2 boxes, and the middle child 1 and the father none. And that is, and there's a very formal definition of equity that we had a subgroup in the early WCAG 3, which was called Silver at that time. And I'll probably call it that by accident, so I figure I better explain that. So we had a whole group that was working on this equity issue, and they came up with a definition, which unfortunately I would have to do a lot of searching to find it. But and they worked for a long time, a good 6 months on this issue and coming up with a good definition of it. So I'm sorry, I don't remember it better.
Fair and impartial is what I've seen in the dictionary. Peter?
Actually, I'm going to give you the little one.
I'll take the list. So. Where? Here.
Yeah.
So. I like that. Analogy, or that whatever, the description of the fence, except in our community, as you all know, there are some people who insist that they don't want a box to stand on, and others who insist they want a hole in the fence at that level.
Yep.
And that, I think that stems from, historical inequities, etc. Inequity, yes. And people really struggling to figure out what they must have, and how to define themselves, even in relation to disability and in relation to the world as a disabled person. And so that throws the discussion it does distort the discussion of equity if everyone has a different, not only a different need, but a different definition of what equity means to them, which we all do. So it goes back to, and then we think about, okay, the standards are all designed to deliver content equitably to everyone. And that then you think about your original question, Gene, which is, should everyone be given equal weight, every disability or every, yeah. I don't know if that's exactly the question you asked, but that's how I perceived it. And I just keep coming back to whatever you can't deliver a 100% equitable experience to everyone. With the web the way it is, with the internet, with apps the way they are, with the world developing everything at breakneck speed.
And that's why we said at the beginning, we want to throw out that 100% perfect.
Yes.
Even discussion. Let's not waste time on it. But it's still a problem that we need to
Yes.
address for sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Might equitable mean if there are, I'm gonna make up a number to make the math easy. If there are 4 disability types, there's 80 success criteria. It's equitable just saying, let's make sure there's 20 success criteria for each disability.
Randy, I can respond to that. Sorry about that. Gotcha. I actually like that definition. Because if you don't give some kind of target, maybe it gets back to your point about metrics. If you don't give some kind of target, or because you're never going to please everybody all the time, right? So I might get cranky on one day. I'm just using myself as an example. Well, I don't have 25. Well, in general, Randy, there's an agreement that there's 20 for each. Just like you said, using your round math numbers. I don't think we need to, but I think that actually makes some sense, right? If you can put something around it other than, and for the record, I don't know, it's like making metrics, but I think that actually kind of makes some sense. You just can point at something that, you know, it's a definition you could revisit over time, right? But at least it's something you point to. You can be a bit agile about it, but at least it's something you can point to. So I sort of like that idea in some ways. No, I have to go write it down, so I'll pass you the. That's the mic.
Offer.
Yeah, thank you. So, one of the things that we had to do when we wrote the AI standard was come up with a definition for equitable, because in Canadian law, it referred to equity as in capital equity, etc. That was the only.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so like related to financial systems. So we, this is our definition that we have, and it's a somewhat long definition. Refers to fairness, justice, and freedom from discrimination. Equity recognizes that each person has different circumstances. Equity is distinguished from equality, while equality provides each individual or group of people with the same resources and opportunities. Equity focuses on enabling all individuals to achieve equal outcomes. In equitable systems, resources and opportunities that are shaped to diverse individual needs, and the individual engaged to determine the needs as well as the resources needed to address the needs. So that's the, I mean, it's not an elegant definition, but that was. So there is that notion of agency and self-determination.
Which is. Can you, I think I need the microphone for this. Can you slide that position?
I think it's just that little slide on the definition.
Thank you.
What you said brought the thought for me. I'm trying to bring it back to the forefront. I wonder at what point do we maybe think about treating disabilities equitably and saying, is that the role of assistive technology? And a well-structured website would, I mean, I'm thinking of something as simple as a menu, right? A food menu. I remember back when the McDonald's had a picture menu you could request. Maybe they still do. But can you, if you were to say, each item somehow was marked up as in, and semantically through XML gives us an opportunity to do this, right? Or JSON or whatever. Here's the item. And then AT can come in and say, oh, it's a cheeseburger. Okay, great. Let's have a picture of that. Could brands then customize what that picture looks like if they wanted to?
I would love to respond.
Yeah.
It's really important. So we have, I think AT is a broken system. It's a broken business system. It's a broken technical system because in the digital space, in that interoperability is always breaking. So
Yeah.
yes, I think there should be a point at which there is the role of this equitable treatment is delegated to something that not everybody has. But I think that has to be integrated into the mainstream or the standard default system, because if not, and I think it should be the legal requirement actually of whoever is producing the system that to address all of the things that an AT addresses. And in fact, that was one of the, we put that forward to both the G20 and the G7 meeting quite a while ago, and there was some certain uptake so that in the number of countries that were regulating accessibility, rather than it being the responsibility of that all of the say and it included Microsoft and Apple and the various digital companies, that they were responsible for meeting all the way to the end user. And they could do it by integrating an assistive technology company. They could do it by whatever, but it was their legal responsibility to make sure that not just that their system was interoperable with the assistive technology, but that there was an assistive technology that could reach that end user. So yes, I think how we achieve it may very well be with specialized devices, but I think we need to rethink what are ATs, because from a business stance, there's no economies of scale. And so the AV companies are struggling, or they are charging
active
people with
whatever, action
disabilities
items, whatever.
far more than anybody else to be able to get
That's good
access.
stuff.
Reconsider it.
And I think that
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
from a systemic perspective, we rethink that.
Broken system of assistive technology. Another TED talk, right? Built
Yep.
in one sentence.
Well, I asked Randy to put that in the action item section because I think that's something that we could very definitely look at more expansively after.
Can you just give me the action item one more time? Just like,
What I heard was
The legal obligation of the producers of the digital systems is to provide access right to the user, not to depend upon, or not to delegate it to
yeah.
external
Yeah.
assistive technology.
And that's also solves a lot of problems related to cognitive disabilities as well.
It does. Yeah.
And
Peanut.
go ahead, Tina.
One or the
Okay.
other. One or the other.
That's right.
Yeah.
Echo, but, and I guess in some ways, Yuta, we're starting to see a little bit of that. I mean, when you think about, like I look at the Microsoft Suites as an example, it has now a built-in screen reader. We see these types of things available on our mobile devices. I think we're starting to see a little bit of that happening with the ability to personalize your experience with magnification, color contrast, and so on and so forth. I don't think it goes as far as it needs to be. My concern with this is that from a business perspective, some of us have had to live with the single point of failure situation, right? And so we need to also think about, how do we plan, in the event of that failure, right? My Microsoft, if I start using the narrator, only use the narrator because it's built into my suite and whatnot, I can't access my Microsoft for whatever reason. I'm doing nothing, right? So I think that there is that. The other thing too, and one of the questions that was often put on the table was the fear that if we did put the onus on these manufacturers, these assistive technology manufacturers would no longer exist. We're actually kind of wiping out a market that is there today. Yeah, and so I think we need to also be aware that, yeah, to me, that's not the case. To me, it gives them an opportunity to innovate more, to, right? But that, unfortunately, is a fear that is out there that people have been, kind of fearful, saying, we got to protect the AT manufacturers as well, right? So we've got to, yeah. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, for sure.
I'm a capitalist economist, right?
Yeah,
So
well,
I
this
think
is
the
it.
idea
Yeah.
of, can we, I'm hearing your question, it's, would it, and can we maybe set aside the idea of like driving out of business and more saying, what is ultimately helping the user?
Yeah.
And is it from an economics perspective, right? It's about specialization, and it's about making sure that the most efficient means are getting to that user. So is one necessarily outdoing the other? I don't know, given that we still have JAWS, we still have narrator, we still have voiceover.
Today.
And we still have NVDA, right? So we have all, just picking on those points. So,
Yeah, so there was, this was part of the discussion. And the notion was that there could be, so basically, the larger companies were financially responsible was and so there was the opportunity to collectively support an assistive technology. The right now, AT companies, especially for individuals who have very, very augmentative and alternative communication systems, the very specialized control systems, cognitive access systems, they're really struggling. And the better they do their job, the worse their the smaller the number of customers for any one function that they're providing. So they have disincentives for making them as usable and accessible as possible. So the idea here was, it was the large companies who were providing the systems that would be financially responsible, and that there could be a collective investment by a number of companies in a particular assistive technology function. There was discussion of having consortia, or it wasn't called consortia, but a particular set of assistive technology service providers that the companies would then need to support. They are then also incentivized to make sure that the interoperability doesn't break, right? So the idea was, because right now, access to APIs, access to SDKs, and those sorts of things, if you listen to the individuals that are the companies that are trying to create the AT, is really difficult, and it's not a smooth process. So how do we smooth that divide there? And I don't want to get too technical, but there were definitely considerations for that.
Thanks. And built into that is the idea of trust, with people with disabilities being left out so long in every iteration of new technology, then how can there be a trust that the big companies that have been excluding everyone will actually follow through? And so to your point, Pina, you want to have your own thing that is going to work for you, and not trust the big company to actually make the assistive technology feature rich enough. And so I think the relationship between the technology companies and people with disabilities also needs to change in that entire ecosystem for trust.
So if I
Any,
think-
yeah.
right, it's any. So I think about it like Microsoft, Apple, Google, done decently well recently. Right, I'm talking about SharePoint from 2000, but we have new SharePoint, right, did a decent job. So then we think about, the ones that I think about are, the app that comes out tomorrow that everybody's gonna start using. The benefit to having a separate assistive technology company is that there's an incentive for that company to make that new app super efficient and easy for me to use, even if the app developer didn't do their due diligence. I think we can put the onus onto the Microsofts and the Apples and the Googles. But the question becomes, their systems are gonna run someone else's app anyway. How do we make sure that that's still usable and equitable for all this?
Mhm.
We have a couple of other questions we can certainly get to. If there's more on this one, I'm more than happy to continue. We can look at the other questions as well and see if we want to move to that. I think we'll probably take a break here in about 10 minutes. So we can start the next topic if y'all want, but also happy to continue this one. What?
I was just, this is Pam.
Oh, I'll bring the mic. What you got?
I just, oops.
Thank you. Just to follow up on your point, Monica, I'm responding, right? Not that I don't, I don't trust the Microsofts of the world. No, I'd love to. I'd love to be able to trust them. I'd love to be able to know that they're not going to make things more complicated for me or bury it into something that I'll never be able to find. That's the challenge I'm having, right? So the big companies have to understand that they can't. The intent of assistive technology is to make sure that people with disabilities can access, can find, can search, can use, right? And they can't lose that. If they lose that by integrating it into their big monster machinery, it defeats the purpose. And I think that that's the problem that we have with the Microsofts and the Apples and everything else of the world. I go back to that example I used yesterday about earlier about the phone, right? I want to be able to find it at my fingertip. I want to be able to turn my machine on and knows that my preferences are all there and I can easily find them. And they're not going to change because tomorrow you're releasing an upgrade. And now all of a sudden my short key doesn't work anymore. That's the challenge we have, is that they're not working with assistive technology at all, or they make it so difficult to discover and use that you have to have the two separate at this point.
Should we look at the other couple of questions?
Yep.
So we can go to 2. So should we be aiming for perfection in disability in WCAG 2? So in WCAG 2, as long as there's a single failure, right? And then an entire page and a site would fail. So is that reasonable given, or even desirable? Does it really make sense that we solve all critical accessibility issues first? And I think that last sentence is probably one that we could treat separately, could also put together here. But this idea of aiming for perfection in WCAG 2, the entire page fails, is that reasonable or desirable?
Well, we're right next to each other.
Yeah. I'm happy to run the other mic, this microphone.
Maybe we can just leave that with Randy and.
That's true.
Run this one.
Okay, is this working for the captioning here? Okay. See, I have some, I've kind of evolved over time, but I do think it comes back to sort of the user story, and I'll give you an example. So, I have to be careful not to mention the product, but there's a cloud product I was a manager for, and you couldn't even provision an instance of a virtual server accessibly. So rather than prioritize the WCAG compliance of the whole site, if you can't provision a site, right, your customers are going to scream at you. So prioritizing that, and even in provisioning the site, if we didn't have one alt text decorative right on the page, we made the decision to kind of prioritize, can people provision, I know I'm slamming this point home, but I think I'm slamming it home for a reason. If you're a customer and you're trying to buy the product, and I have no hope of provisioning an instance, you're not going to buy my product if you're a screener user. I would tell you not to buy the product. So I think what I'm saying is it's the one failure kills you is probably not a reasonable way to go. And it's not how I've mentored teams, to be quite honest. Even though, I learned under Phil Jenkins and folks like that, who names I think there's some, one failure shouldn't kill you necessarily. Now we could talk about what the failure is, but that's, I'm sure we'll get there. Should I pass the mic to Pina now?
And I noticed there's a couple of new folks who've joined us. As well. You want to share your name? Sure.
Hi, I'm sorry, I don't know if there's anybody else who's doing, I'm Diana Ferrante, I'm at Macmillan Learning.
Yeah, I'm Kevin White. I work at WBC. I'm team contact for the accessibility guidelines working group.
Yeah, we got
Rochelle.
Oh, somebody else is coming in.
No.
Some more people coming in the room.
Look, yeah, are you able to reach the mic computer there?
Yeah.
Or they run this one too?
Right here is there's a box. There's the little mic.
Got it. There we go.
Okay. So the question I also have is this notion of very, very specific failure criteria or the criteria themselves. What if someone comes up with it doesn't allow for flexibility and change to actually innovate in the way that we achieve the particular outcomes, because it's very much success criteria focused. So in addition to the question here, I would also add, is one of the issues that if someone, say, comes up with something that achieves the intended outcome, the spirit of this thing, even better than what is specified, they're going to be failing, right? They will not meet the success criteria. So we've also designed it in such a way that it really doesn't allow us to progress as quickly as some of the changing technology is progressing.
If you can give us kind of an example of what that might look like.
Oh, it's Monica. I'll make a comment and then just pass it back to you and when you then take that single point of failure as being a determination of success, and then you layer on top of that a regulation that expects that failure, then it really entrenches the need to fix something that, perhaps, as you're saying, isn't going to impact someone's experience. And then the focus gets lost on how do we work on that end-to-end customer experience so that people can achieve the outcome that this, digital software is intended for. And instead of just focusing on that one success criteria failure, which means that you're not going to meet a regulation.
What would that look like from an example perspective for you of where we've limited innovation with our guidelines?
Well, we're talking innovation, so we're talking about possible other ways. So, okay, let me think of an example very quickly off the top of my mind. After, say, with captioning, we have a mode of captioning, and we have a much more. Gallaudet came up with a very, very rich way of including more than just the text, so that you have indicators of a whole range of things, but it breaks the specific technical requirements. That's probably not the greatest example, but I can think of innovative ways of meeting many of the specific outcomes that we want, so that we have access without actually following the technical requirements. But give me a few minutes to think of some more.
That's kind of our question here. The single point of failure piece is kind of where we're focused, right? So if you were missing captions, that would be, you missed captions on one video, your site has hundreds, right? That site technically fails. Is that?
Yeah, so that's probably, so my example is probably not a good one. I will come up with some where there are faster, more innovative ways of achieving the actual outcome than we've specified. Because at the time that we created the success criteria, these possibilities were not there. And so, because as Monica says, that it's entrenched in legislation, which takes quite a while. So, okay. I'm going to go back historically, okay, and give you an example, which I'm not saying is what's happening now, but I was involved in as an expert witness in the Donna Jodhang case in Canada. And Canada had embedded WCAG 1.0 into the regulations. So it was a legal requirement that all government websites had to meet WCAG 1.0, which of course had a restriction on JavaScript. And at the same time as that was regulated, all of the government websites also had to, all of the government services had to move on to the web. So, which required, of course, interactive systems, and which pitted accessibility against doing your job, basically, as a webmaster within the government. So they had to choose between either actually achieving like a service online through the web, or adhering to accessibility legislation. So when we looked at what was the talk about accessibility, most of the requests were, how do we bypass accessibility? How do we get exempted because this is our function? And so it pitted accessibility against the function of the government, because we had created something which was then embedded in legislation, which prevented, in fact, the change that was required. So so that's part of the. There's other. I'll come up with some other examples.
It's Kevin.
Yes.
I think this question, sorry, forgive me. I think this question's flawed. Because we're talking about WCAG 2 and we're saying, well, a single failure page site fails. Yeah, it does. If there's a failure in the site, it fails to conform against WCAG 2. But that's not the only thing. That's not the kind of layer that we're thinking about. I think the layer we're thinking about is compliance with the legislation. And what's happened is the legislators and regulators have basically gone, well, we'll take WCAG 2, we'll take the conformance model in there, we'll just slap it all into a bit of regulation, job's a good one, off we go. It's great. Without considering the consequences of that. And the consequences are, well, that means a single point of failure means your entire site fails to comply with the legislation, which is it's a slightly different statement, as I'm sure are aware. And I think that's the challenge. It's not necessarily that we've got it wrong in terms of the conformance for WCAG 2. We could probably do better, and we're exploring that with WCAG 3. But it's that we've embedded that absolute yes, no into regulation, and that's a different space. That's a different kettle of fish, and that's a different challenge. And I think that's where we're starting to see these problems. I mean, ultimately, if we're going to the first part of the question, should we aim for perfection? Disability. Should we be aiming for perfection? No, we should be ensuring that the services that people need are accessible to them. And if someone comes along and says, I can't use this, then we go, okay, let's see if we can work out how to fix it for your use. But that doesn't necessarily work when you start thinking about regulation, about conformance, and about people bringing legal action on large scale organizations. Run. Okay, because they're two different things. One is conformance against a standard, the other is compliance with regulation. And those are different things. And what we've done is we've conflated them, and
what we've done over the years is we've effectively got to the point where we're saying these are the same thing and they're not. And that's the challenge. A regulator could turn around and go, and in fact they do. I mean, the EU regulation, the Web Accessibility Directive has a number of exemptions that just says, yeah, for maps, you don't need to worry about this thing. For archives, you don't need to worry about this thing. So the regulators, in terms of outlining what compliance could be, kind of come across with different things. They could turn around and say, yep, there's no one site, there's no one problem fails the entire site. We're going to do it like this. We're going to do a different model. And that's for compliance with the regulation, not conformance with the standard. And I think that's the challenge. We've kind of pushed this all to be the same thing, and they're not the same thing. And that makes it difficult to fix the problem.
Compliance, that's fairly different. They're looking to other standard bodies, right? And saying, hey, we're gonna adopt that technical standard, but what makes conformance on the web different?
Well, conformance and compliance are different things. So conformance is you have a standard, a series of things that you must meet, and you're saying my thing meets all these issues. Compliance is actually we've got a regulation which has a standard underneath it, but there are also things where the regulator can bring in caveats, can bring in different representations, can bring in exemptions, and indeed do, where actually to comply with the law, it's not that you need to 100% conform, you just need to conform about in these ways, and you can ignore this one for this circumstances. So there's always the opportunity for a regulator to kind of turn around and say, well, actually, we're going to take this conformance, but we're not going to take the whole lot for everything. And as I say, that's done. That happens all over the place. So they are different things, but I think, and this is where it's more a case of, well, where do we fix the problem? Because we could look at WCAG 2 and we could go, well, WCAG 2 is flawed because it's got a single failure, entire page or process fails. But you could go, well, that's just conformance. Where it's having an effect is in the regulators and how the regulators have adopted that. So if you change the regulation, you fix the problem. But it does create issues. Sorry,
all the other groups are all rating, so we having the income match.
Sorry, Gene.
And I think the question we come back to, right, is saying, the thing that maybe we can ponder over Brave is, does that make sense? Is it okay to them maps? When I'm a blind person who wants to understand the layout of this campus, you know exempted maps. Is that something that regulators should be doing, given that we're aiming for, compliance? Is this something to think about? So we don't, lots of other opportunities we can talk about. When we get back, probably about 11 minutes.
So we're aiming to be back at 10:20, 15.
Yeah.
10:15.
Yeah, right?
10:15.
Yeah. I'm so sorry. How was the discussion going? That was interesting.
Yeah, about, I think it's good. I'm sorry we missed, but what did we miss earlier? And you don't know.
I don't know either.
Or what were the key points from the beginning, or do you want to rephrase those or reframe them again when we come back?
This was a question from the beginning.
Right, I was here for the first little bit, yeah.
I am happy to run it. Let me go. By the door and try to. And just.
Don't fit into that.
Back up and start up.
Seriously, we love that. Well,
I was asking, well, basically, what my most successful experience in New York City was, I lived there. And I said, well, it was really accessible. I don't remember it thinking about
yeah,
its accessibility.
it's just seamless. Yeah,
So I don't know if that ever happens on the web.
I'm sure it does. I'm sure there are situations where it's just seamless, but I think that somebody was talking to me the other day and they were saying, oh, I didn't realize you could have accessible Word documents. And I said, well, no, you can have Word documents with accessibility features sort of addressed. And but is a Word document 100% accessible if you've got all the one accessible features? No, probably not. There is going to be somebody somewhere who's not going to be able to use that for bingo. And I think this is the challenge. It's we kind of talk about accessibility and go 100% accessible. Hey, and you're going, for who? Who's it 100% accessible for? Because it's not going to be for everybody. Sorry, Jean.
You know, we started up again.
We are starting up again. Everyone is mostly in the room.
I'm mostly in the room.
Take away from me, Andrew. Let me get.
Okay.
So why are we talking about equity and full accessibility when the ADA does use this useful term of reasonable accommodation? And that doesn't ever seem to apply to web accessibility standards. So what's reasonable? We abandon that idea in the press for full accessibility. I don't have an answer. I think it would be useful. It would be reasonable to be reasonable. Of course, we can argue about what's reasonable, but I think that's more useful than arguing about equity, because everyone has to determine their own equitable standards. And again, as I said earlier, for me, it's understanding that I'm going to get I want to get the most information I can get, and know that I'm not going to get everything everything that's on this web page or app page, but I'm going to get something out of it. And can I get what I need? And if I can't fill something in or find the link to the next item I need, or get back to where I was 2 seconds ago, which is happening a lot, then it's not reasonable. Those are all simple, reasonable things that should be available.
I actually wanted to take a look at the idea of, could we change the conformance model for WCAG, not in WCAG 2, but WCAG 3, so that we address some of these issues? And, could we look at a way of approaching conformance that is reasonable accommodation, that addresses the, single point of failure fails everything? Because even though how it's implemented is a compliance issue, that doesn't mean that we have to be constrained by it from a standards basis. So we could look at examples of, particularly for the example that always comes up is for large, massive websites with millions and millions of pages. Is there a way to handle this so that as long as they have alternative text on their images, and the alternative text is works in the templates, do they have to test every single page? Particularly on the dynamic sites where we're talking all kinds of variations on this. How could we look at a conformance model that would allow that? Even though that it's separate from how the regulators would say, yes, you have to do it this way. But as the technologists, we could be saying, this is what we're recommending, is how we approach the conformance. You know, so we could do things like, say, percentages of things, you know, percentages of alt text. So, yep, go ahead.
Just to continue my analogy to reasonable accommodations in the physical world. And again, to reiterate to the community that I'm not a technologist. I'm a user. But just coming in here, I definitely needed this, or finding the coffee, I needed and wanted and accepted assistance from an individual. There are points definitely during my day at work when I reach out to someone on a team viewer or quick assist or some remote session so I can get assistance. And that's an accommodation I've accepted. I'm not saying I love it. Of course, it would be better if I could do it all myself. But until we get there, which is a long way away, why can't we set up systems that acknowledge that that's going to happen? I mean, we have those systems, they exist. But the WCAG doesn't allow for them, at what point can we say it's reasonable for someone to then reach out and seek assistance just as people do in the physical world, physical environment? And it's not that we don't say, oh, I wish the world were designed perfectly for me. I do, but I know it's not. And just as I know the web's not designed perfectly for me, I don't want to waste my time railing at everyone who's committed that against me, perpetrated it. Although I do occasionally curse out, you know, why not? But not like Carl. I mean, gosh, no. Anyway, that's what.
So I actually, I guess, two things. One, Peter, what you were saying, I have often asked, because I'm doing a lot of work with small communities and small organizations, the question of why have we separated physical and digital? And the further we go into kiosks and the further we go into point of sale devices and even digital devices that with COVID need physical cleaning, for example, those overlaps feel more and more artificial, or that break between the physical and the digital feels more and more artificial. And with small organizations, sometimes them fixing their website is really, really difficult because they had a friend build it 5 years ago and they don't know a thing about it and they can't really get it done. But what they could do is provide a phone number and hours when somebody could call them and they'd be happy to walk them through it. Sometimes it's difficult, like by dividing those into different things, they don't have a trade-off space to do work and make decisions. So we've in some ways hamstrung that. And that's been a big question that's kind of come up in those conversations. Switching hats entirely to the WCAG space, with WCAG 3, the first round we put out looked at percentages. Like if you had 20 alt tech images on a website and 80% of those were okay, it would pass. Like that was something, or 95%. It was some pretty high number, like you missed one. But there's huge questions of, well, what's an image? And, you know, if you have 3 images together, how do you count that as one? Well, what happens when someone games it by putting a whole bunch of little empty spacer gifs at the bottom and now their percentage is okay because those are decorative. And so like it was the feedback was really like, that's just too hard from a lot of perspectives. So we kind of ditched that thought. What we're talking about now is a combined model. Going to Yuta's point earlier, instead of writing things like success criteria the way we do now, we have them very much outcome centered because we're not assuming just the author can solve a problem. So kind of taking Jean's example of a shopping site with images, if you have templates and you have images, and let's say all those images for some reason have text on top, like they have the name of the item as text inlaid in the image. And you know that Apple and Microsoft and every screen and JAWS, and let's say every screen reader out there could pull that text successfully. Do you need alt text? Maybe you don't, right? Like we're hitting a point where the ability to, or the need to require specific solutions is not there. It's kind of the movement from WCAG 1 to WCAG 2. Now we're doing 3. We need to be outcome centered. So that's been a big shift in how we're looking at things. But the other part of it is very much process. Like it's not embedded in a single site anymore. It's crossing this process line. So I may want to log into a site, but now I need to move to my phone, which is part of the interface, part of the process of getting in, and move back to the site. I may need to do several things. And so it's the process, regardless of the boundaries of what the product is, accessible. And so we're looking at a balance of those two things. Like a site must have certain basic requirements as outcomes based on the technology stack being assumed to be used. And then this thought of, well, do we have processes we can look at? And if there's something we can do there. So I kind of want to just give those thoughts to you. And I would love to hear, does that sound like the right direction, the wrong direction? What else could we do to improve it? Did I miss anything, Kevin?
Nope.
No? Okay, so those are that's the framework of what we're talking about and would love feedback on. And mic's out to anyone who has thoughts.
I think that's a really good balance. And I think that's some of where we've gotten organically in this discussion, haven't we? We kind of talked about being more outcome based. That it's a great point about, like with 2FA, you have to go to your phone to do something, right? Do this and then go back. And there's lots of those cases. So I think thinking outcome based, not only is it a good idea, but if you think about it, that's where we've kind of come organically in this discussion, I would say, from what I've observed anyway.
It's Monica. I'm not sure where or if this fits at all, but I know that when we were trying to at the bank figure out conformance in order to report compliance, the compliance question was, does it meet WCAG 2.0 AA, yes or no? Like, how do you answer that question, right? And so in order to answer it in an ethical way, then you want to get to 100% success criteria. Sometimes we didn't. And so internally, like we tried to develop some sort of a risk framework, 1, 2, 3, if there was, and the risk framework was based on a number of different things, the number of failures, the impact, how often the pages were used. So it was imperfect, but it's something that just helped us move forward to done and perhaps not perfection, and satisfies. Like if there was a barrier that somebody couldn't get to the end of task, for sure, that was like top, had to be done. But we also had to move forward, keep moving forward in getting this work done, and, reporting to regulators and reporting to executives. And that was just one of the ways in which we bridge that gap between conformance and compliance.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to add something to when we actually, just before we broke out, following Kevin's point about WCAG, and the fact that what was the word you used, Kevin? We morphosized it.
Completed.
The two. I always go back to the acronyms of WCAG, right? Web accessibility content guidelines, right? And this is what they are. They're guidelines and they're a tool. It's a tool to make sure that, well, hold on, let me finish. It's a tool that it gives you prescribed, defined things, steps that you need to do in order to achieve some degree of accessibility. Okay. I use the analogy of built environment. Some of you are familiar with that, right? We have built standards, right? The fact that they meet the standards, if the building isn't designed properly, still going to have the same issue that we are having with websites, right? So they're guidelines, they're tools, but I agree that there is a difference between what this is vis-a-vis what, you know, conformance versus what is compliance. And you can conform to something, but it doesn't mean you're compliant, right? And so I think to your point earlier, we need to start having that, reframe that language around what is WCAG, what is the purpose of WCAG, how is it to be used. Many organizations thought, and still they think of it as a checklist. We need to do all of it in order to be successful. And I don't think that that's the case. I really don't think that if you meet, we all know, if you can meet all of the criteria within WCAG and you're still not going to be accessible. So the fact of the matter is that I think we need to start rephrasing how what is WCAG and how it is meant to be used.
That's why we're here, right? Yeah, I mean, this is Corb, so I would just clarify that, you know, I would challenge you to say, find me a site that's 100% compliant that's not usable. Because I don't think one exists. I think it would inherently not be compliant. I think we've done like for all the failures of WCAG 2, right? I think we've covered a good chunk of what would make the site not usable for most, you know, the majority of folks with disabilities. It is most.
But it's very similar to when we started having standards in Ontario, the province where we came from, right? There was this whole conversation around fully accessible versus acceptable, right? Accessible for most. And that's the difference, right? There's a lot to be said about language. Yes, I think that it can for most be accessible if you follow the guidelines, but it's not for everyone. But you're still going to have those exceptions, and you have to be aware of those exceptions. And the same thing, you know, you're never going to fully. I can't think of the best one fully, you know, achieve perfection. Oh, we have to achieve perfection. We can get close to it, right? But we have lots of tools and resources that will guide us back to that level of perfection or almost perfection. But whatever, you know, it's very difficult to achieve that perfection, given all the complexity that we're dealing with here.
Yeah, so just to clarify too, and I realized maybe we had some folks, do we have folks join us after the break that weren't here before? Yeah. Can we just do a quick round of who's joined us, just your name and whatnot? Yeah.
I was Sharon Rush, Nobility. I'm sorry I missed the first hour.
First, I am here representing Smith County, Texas. We are now trying to get in standard and trying to find out what the best ways are to the amount of the information that but want to make sure that we get all aspects to where the information is helpful to everybody, not just those that our website is already difficult to navigate through. So even now, knowing all the accessibility steps and navigation portions with headers, links, things like that, where do I even begin? There's so much. Just the first 2 days being here, I've received so much information and understanding of it all, but it's like, okay, where do I even start? where's that starting point?
And I'm so sorry, I missed your first name. Crystal, thank you. Thank you very much. And for those who joined late, we're if possible, just say your name when you're looking for the mic, and then we can run one over to you, as opposed to raising hands. So should we be aiming perfection? And then this idea of the single failure, is that reasonable? Or is that even desirable? Does it make sense to tackle, maybe this is the question we haven't quite addressed yet, for those who are interested, right? Does it make sense to tackle those critical accessibility issues first? Randy was talking about that right before the break, that it was a tool that helped you bought it to provision websites. And I'm oversimplifying, I'm sure, but you couldn't do that accessibly. And maybe there were alt text issues, and there were keyboard traps, and there were those sorts of things, right? If I'm understanding, Randy. Like across the site, right? There might, those kinds of issues, right? That's what I mean by critical issues. Does it make sense to tackle those first, as opposed to trying to maybe close out and make the site, make other parts of that website fully accessible before you could even do that critical task? Yeah, okay. Yeah. Yeah, Kevin.
Listening, I really should listen more. Unfortunately, I think the answer to that question is it depends. And I think it depends on who you're doing it for. So if someone has approached your organization and said, I need to submit this application form in order to get access to water in my household, and I can't do it because the form doesn't allow me to for accessibility issues. That's a critical issue, and that's the one you fix. But if a legislator is coming to you and going, or if a lawyer is coming to you and going, your website's inaccessible and we're suing you, then the criticality doesn't matter because of the problem in legislation, which is an all or nothing type thing. So you have to fix all of it. So what do you start with? Probably the easiest ones to fix. They may not be the most critical ones. They may not be the most important ones, but they're the ones that are going to allow you to demonstrate progress and get the lawyer off your back. So this is the challenge. It depends, because we've got so many pressures on accessibility issues and where the demand to address them is coming from. And I think that's kind of tied up with that question as well.
Thanks. I would say the good news is we don't have to worry about WCAG 2 from a regulatory perspective for another 10 months in terms of in the US, right? Because right now it's all about reasonable and effective communication, reasonable accommodations, effective communication. So we can say, you're still communicating effectively, fix the form. Maybe there's images without alt text at the very bottom that are not, they're maybe brand marks, they're spacers, they're whatever, right? They don't have alt text, but you're not using them. Today, we can actually say effective communication. Yeah, you've effectively communicated. In April of next year and the year after, becomes a lot harder because we have WCAG 2.1 AA in the US. And I recognize that's a US centric public sector viewpoint.
Yeah, just to say that's 2018.
Right, for sure. Absolutely. I agree. I agree.
This maybe is it depends.
Yeah. Who else?
Thank you. Thank you.
So to me, this question is granular. But it's important in order to figure out success in a broader scale for an accessibility program. And if you're focusing on the granular all the time, then how, it's like, can you see the forest for the trees? And so I think these questions are super, super important, but they have to be understood in the broader context of what people are trying to do to move accessibility forward in an organization.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think there's a balance point in that because we've seen like different ways of measuring organizational accessibility, but then it never gets down to the gritty. So you don't like, it's like, do you have website assessments? Well, yes, I do. I'm failing all of them, but I have them. So I can check this box. And so there's some balance point. I'm not sure where that is.
Sorry, just
Kevin?
on that note, one of the interesting ones with the EU legislation, and I don't know if anybody knows this or has looked at the EU legislation, but as a public sector organization, I could run an assessment, fail absolutely everything, admit to all my failures, and I would be compliant with the legislation by being non-conformant with WCAG. So this is why the difference between conformance and compliance is really important, and also where you kind of need to think about, okay, well, what are your regulators doing? And what they were trying to do with that was they were trying to push organizations to do something. So admit to their failures, make it public, make them transparent, make them sort of or encourage them to actually show progress. And I keep when I see anytime I see perfection in an accessibility discussion, I always come back to the progress over perfection statement. I think it was always about, can we demonstrate progress? How do you do that within a standard? Do you embed that you are conformant with the standard by showing progress? I don't think that's feasible. Can you do it in regulation? Probably the better place to do it. But again, what does that look like in regulation? And that's maybe where guidance for policymakers, regulators, and kind of outlining this is how to kind of accept the fact that nothing's perfect. So, Peter.
Okay, hi, little Mike. I'm going to say, well, first I'm curious whether that's been effective, in what way it's been effective, and just, here, as is known, we, in the US, people typically, instead of being transparent, people just put up an accessibility statement that says accessibility is something we think about, and we know it's there, but anyway. No, sorry. Shut up. I did this yesterday. I'm going to point back to the environmental sustainability and responsible development, building development, which has provided incentives, not direct incentives, but created incentives for developers and real estate owners in the commercial sector to build responsibly, for the simple reason there are market incentives. In other words, they can charge higher rents. If they're an owner, they can get more value if they sell. If they're a corporation trying to attract employees, they can point to a better living standard working standard in their buildings. And I think incentives are something that just are completely missing in accessibility because of the righteousness of our cause. Yes, you must be accessible, and there's no question that you must be. And for people who, as many people haven't ever thought about accessibility until they suddenly need it, it just doesn't compute, so to speak. And so I do believe that regulators, legislators, and the community could begin to think about how that might be created, so that instead of just doing their best to avoid litigation here in the US, they could seek approval, seek congratulations, whatever. Neither of those are the words I want, but seek some kind of recognition that they've made progress and then made more progress, and then the most progress, then they get the most incentive.
Back when we were still working on the early part of, if you hold on to that for a minute, I'll get it, pick it up in a second.
Okay.
Oh, good, Rochelle's.
Thank you.
One of the ways we started with the Silver project is we started doing research on what worked and what didn't work about WCAG 2. And then we also went out and interviewed industry leaders to get some of their ideas. And then we held a 2-day design sprint with industry leaders to get their ideas of how we could structure. At that point, it was called Silver, and later was renamed WCAG 3. And I was one of the group that interviewed Eve Hill, who spoke at the lunch. And her idea for us was to look at the building standards and to model WCAG 3 after the building standards. And unfortunately, that hasn't worked out. Although we still do talk about bronze, silver, gold instead of AAA, AAA, but that's about it. And it would be really, I think it would be a very good idea to re-examine that on.
Yeah. First version of this in 1994.
Let's say it. So I would say, a couple thoughts. One is, and that's maybe stepping into the role of Vermont Cooler. Which is kind of bad word, right? But one, on the brown silver gold. If we set legislation and you must immediately flip it wrong.
What is the market incentive to meet silver? The silver standard, right? What is the market advantage to meet the gold silver standard?
Right, what I want that the market says this is good enough, this is what people with abilities have agreed, yeah,
If that's a real question though, Corb, is that a real question? Why would we do more than that? Because I have an answer if it's a real question. Of why it would be, why you would, because, Jeff Klein sat in this room and said, the business case, blah, 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 blah. He didn't believe in the business case. Well, I am a devotee, absolute believer in the business case. And I can show you, and there are studies, I don't know how anyone can say that anymore, because we've got the old moldy curb cut effect idea, but when you make accessible websites, they are more usable, more understandable, more flexible for different devices. They're better. They give you a better user experience, and that pays off for businesses. So to say, oh, the business case, we've tried to make it for years, like Jeff did yesterday, is bollocks. And I think that there's no doubt that if we started making the business case more robustly and absolutely, and we can't negate the civil rights case, because that's absolutely important and true as well. But I think there are reasons why people would go from bronze to silver to gold if they saw ka-ching, ka-ching, the show me the money. Who wants this back?
anywhere
And we say no school district can purchase this if it's not meeting at least bronze. So let's imagine a world where there's two competing software devices. What I hear you saying, Sharon, is the reason that company A wants to get from bronze to silver is because they believe and understand, to be clear, I would agree, that when they make it more accessible, it becomes a better product. Teachers will like it more, students will like it more. It might not be because of accessibility in the teacher's view, they just like the product better, it's easier to use, and it's more accessible. The accessibility standard was a way of them getting there and measuring it. Okay, making sure I just track what you're saying. So I think it's a fair point. The other one I wanted to raise, and we don't have to go in order here, but the other one I wanted to raise is this idea of progress over perfection. It's a phrase that drives me a little batty, because let's think about yesterday going to Salt Lick. The bus pulled up. Yeah, Sharon's gonna punch me in a minute. The bus pulls up, right? For those who weren't there, the bus pulls up. A lot of people get on, and we try and use the lift, and it didn't even come out of the bus. Okay, so long story short, we got the bus kind of sort of put back together, but the bus couldn't move because it thought the lift was still out. So they used a screwdriver and they fixed the lift. Well, they fixed it so that we could drive, but not so the lift actually worked. We got a second bus. This time we actually got the lift ramp off the bus. It opened. Didn't actually work to get a wheelchair user onto the bus, but it opened. Well, that's progress. Let's celebrate because the bus company did better. That's what progress, that's how a lot of people hear. That's not the intent, to be clear. I know that's not the intent of progress over perfection. Or, applying that digitally, last night I registered my kid for school. I couldn't get past screen 1 because of 2 unlabeled images. So they maybe fixed a bunch of form fields on pages 3, 4, and 5. But to me, should we really be celebrating the progress they made on pages 3, 4, and 5 if there's a barrier on page 1? To me, it's not as much about perfection. Perfection is an elusive standard, I would agree. But the idea of celebrating progress leads a lot of companies to say, well, we have 3 fewer errors in our report this year than last year. Hey, we introduced plenty more, but it's better. And I think that's something we might want to be thinking about as we say that phrase. How it's put.
So Corb,
Better, right?
Corb, can I, okay. I have can I quickly interject to something?
So I'm trying to say names first as opposed to just raising hands, just so,
Yeah.
So that's all. Good.
I did.
Sure, Randy here. I think what you're saying, and I would agree, is it's progress toward tangible outcomes over perfection. So your tangible outcome part failed because you couldn't move past page 1, right? So that's not progress. Because in this case, it's progress toward a tangible outcome. You know, if I think about how we do agile development, it's toward a business outcome. It's not, oh, we made progress, we finished 20 stories. Who cares? Right? Were the 20 stories going toward a tangible outcome? So I think if I were to amend that, it's projectable, I'm trying to say progress toward tangible outcomes. So maybe you have to bring that into tangible outcomes over, I have 10 less alt text errors on my site. Well, like you said, who cares if the outcomes don't work? I don't know if that helps, but that's, I'm also an agile guy, so I tend to worry about go toward that direction, but I think it fits a bit better.
I type quickly because that was a good point worth saving, Mr. Scragg. Yeah, and you did that.
No, I actually wasn't going to make almost exactly the same point, which brings us back to the technical requirements as opposed to the outcomes. So what are the metrics? What are we measuring? And where are we progressing? But Randy stated it quite well. I've been unfortunately out of the room for a second, but I wanted to also say something about what Kevin was saying in terms of the difference between compliance and conformance, and at a practical level as opposed to sort of a theoretical level. One of the things that I've been seeing and working with our Ministry of Justice, etc., is the way that we've designed. I know we're not intending to create things for legal compliance, but we do have to admit that that does happen. And the way that we've designed the standards and the conformance framework, etc., has the effect that there are more exemptions all the time, because it's sort of an all or nothing type of strategy that, oh, well, we can't do this part of that, so we're going to exempt all of that. So is there a way that we can design these guidelines or the standards or the specifications or whatever we're doing in terms of accessibility that we know will be probably embedded in regulation in such a way that the regulators are not going to be tempted to exempt or exclude whole sections of it, but that there is some flexibility and adaptability, and we reduce the number of exceptions.
Thank you. I think I keep going back, to the question in my mind. Who has the authority to measure if something?
Right? So I like this idea of focusing on outcome. Because I think at the end of the day, if the work we're doing does not positively impact the user, doesn't make a difference in the user's life, it doesn't matter what we're doing, right? So my big question though is where is our role as persons with disabilities in this when it comes to measuring the impact? What can we do to kind of say, this is valid, this works, right? This actually has a profound impact on my experience. So I think you're right. I think we do have to change. We do have to think about how we develop those metrics, whether they are more clear in the requirements. But we also have to figure out a way where, we as the users have a voice in this to make sure that when a company says we are making progress, when a company is saying they're saying we are accessible, I think it's important for the community to have a say in validating that somehow.
It's interesting to hear you say that because several years ago, the National Federation of the Blind thought about that exact idea. So Scott LaBar came before a large group of folks in DC and said, you know what, we're going to put out the Websites and Software Applications Accessibility Act. We are not going to say WCAG. We're going to say it has to be non-visually accessible according to the blind. Now, right, it's a selfish idea. We're talking only about blindness. Just go with me on this for a second, right? Right? So like they're focused on their members for a second here. Right? That was their goal. We'll discuss whether they should be thinking broadly another day. But I think the idea there, right, is that why did the Software Applications Accessibility Act switch to be WCAG? Well, it had to switch because we needed a testable standard. And so the community involvement is a great laudable thing, and we need to do more of that. We need to find ways for the W3C process to be more accessible and more inclusive so that we can create a better standard. I agree with you on that. But I think the idea of can we find a way to test it is ultimately what we kind of keep coming back to. And Jean, I think you mentioned that yesterday to me about that's one of the challenges with cognitive is how do you test cognitive accessibility? Can we quantify it? Can we measure it? Can we count it? How do we do that? It's difficult too when it's it's a graph that's not linear. Go ahead.
And yeah, and on that note, it's also like if you put yourself in the shoes of the business themselves, right? To our point, they see this as a competitive edge. They see this accessibility is important. I want business A to know that my customers to know that I am committed to accessibility. I am doing accessibility. I'm progressing as a company in accessibility. But what do they trust? What do they go by? We know the design and model that really didn't work, right? We know that some of the work that others, even IWP's done, hasn't worked. So how do we help organizations really kind of say, let them know that what they're doing is working based on outcomes, not just dollars, okay, but really making a difference, if you know what I mean. Yeah, and that goes for a career profession too, right? It's all around. How do I know someone who who has the right experience for accessibility, I can engage them, right? It's not just because they have a CPACC or a WAS or have nothing, right? How do you know? How do we make that decision?
Who have we not heard from? Oh, go ahead. Yeah, I was just gonna say, let's see, who have we not heard from that maybe has a thought that's a little on the side? It's been quieter. Kevin, you've been listening. Yeah. You did. No, is there anyone else who has a thought we haven't heard from on this yet? Happy to go to you, Joe.
Yeah, I just wanted to contribute one resource, and I'll add it to the notebook. Back in 2017, 2018, we created this notion of an accessibility ecosystem model for the phase 2 of the AODA. And it was based upon the functional accessibility or functional requirements from the EU, from the EN 301549, which of course has the functional accessibility requirements as the foundation, and they're outcomes based. They stated it more from a deficit model. So these are the deficits, therefore this is what functionally you have to be able to achieve. And we reframed it to be from the perspective of the provider of the thing that has to be accessible. So if you are presenting something visually, then you have to have these alternatives available. If you are if you're providing audio, this is etc. So that it was someone who needed to comply could say, okay, yeah, I am providing these things, therefore I need these alternatives. We worked out how this could be testable, how the community could be engaged. So I'll put that reference on so it's called phase 2 of the AODA. And originally we were looking at it only for information and communication technology. It went through public review, it went through the committee, and then our government changed, which you know what happens here when governments change. But there had been quite a bit of movement to actually adopt it and to have an outcomes-based ecosystem with greater community involvement. And of course, your EN 301549 is also to some extent outcomes-based, with the technical requirements being much more flexible.
So one thing that WCAG 3 is also considering is assertions, which is this concept of non-testable things that we know improve accessibility, like conducting user testing with people with disabilities or doing plain language reviews of content with certified experts or at least people who have experience, or assisted technology testing. So certain things that we know do improvements, they are somewhat amorphous, really. Like they're hard to get they're hard to get repeatable results all the time, but they're really critical. And so would really also welcome thoughts on how we could do that well. And so one question for the user testing. Okay, so let's say we have a model where people test certain processes because they've identified those as important. That's what they're going to declare conformance against. And so they're going to test that with end users with disabilities. And that's going to, in some way, balance out them not doing some harder, more repeatable requirements that are secondary for some reason. All right, so you've made that decision. How many user groups do you have to test with for that to be a good decision to make, right? Like, do you just test with individuals who are blind? Do you test with representatives from each user group? What are those user groups that we're testing? Because you can divide them a number of different ways. And that's just one real small example of how hard it is to kind of think about making an assertion or a process. Or do we just leave it open and somebody states, this is what I did, and people can evaluate the conformance claim based on what they say they did? So curious on thoughts on that.
I love the idea. I think if we want conformance to be have a place in the sort of development cycle. We've got to create ways for it to be flexible and while also effective. So much of it is you definitely want there to be objective proof, but you know, the subjective usability of a thing is deeply important, and I think that should, you know, take precedent about in terms of what gets fixed and what gets done, the impact, right?
I'm not sure I have a fully formulated thought here, but to your point around user testing, that's something that I'm working around often. It's a very tricky spot to be in because, like you said, how many disabilities are you representing? How many folks from each of those disability categories are you representing to make sure that you feel confident in the results that you're presenting over to your product teams? I think one of the really tricky pieces of this is when you are, no matter the size of your sample size, you're going to get extremely varying results on the very same like piece of your platform, what have you. And those extremely varying results, oftentimes product teams look back at research that they have done with users without disabilities and said, oh, we've already proved that this is the best for our users. So we're going to just stick with this easier route because you have some evidence that says that, oh, it's working for this person with a disability. Whereas someone with the very same disabilities, it's even like screen magnifier users who are screen magnifying to 1100% versus 400% are having very different experiences and may call out very different things. And then whose advice or whose like preference are you moving forward with? Are you advocating for to make changes? I think that the other very, very hard part about user testing that makes it very hard to measure is if you are not working on the part of the platform or what have you that the product team is working on in that moment, are they going to go back to that part of the platform and are they going to decide based on your findings? Often like, oh, that was a month ago, we worked on that. And when it comes to sourcing people with disabilities, often it can be tricky, that process in itself, right? So trying to keep up with like product sprint cycles and everything like that to be able to get to the things that they are talking about in that moment is it's so hard. It's so hard to keep up with. So while I do find that user testing is so critical, it's a really important piece of the puzzle, I don't think that measuring against or giving people leeway saying, oh, you're doing user testing, this makes you better than somebody, you know what I mean? A different like accessibility programs initiative. I personally don't think that's the best route.
That's a very interesting perspective. It's not one that, as we've been talking about, different ways we can do associates that anyone has raised. So I appreciate it. Okay, great.
I have one other, this is a little bit different. I had one other, I don't know if it's a question or what it's going to become, but I was thinking back to your point, Monica, that you raised about like oftentimes we get the question of like, are you compliant? Just like yes or no, checkbox. And oftentimes we have folks that reach out to us who know nothing about accessibility with that question. And I think that it's a little bit of I don't know if double-edged swords, I'm terrible at idioms. I don't know if that's the right phrase here, but I think it's a little bit of a double-edged sword in terms of like the language that we're using, because in that framework, we're more or less asking the product to be perfect. And that's what we're striving for. But also, and so as accessibility professionals, we, as an ethical standpoint, we do not want to be saying yes, because we know that that isn't the answer. Like to me, there is no 100% accessible. But from the other side of things, it's actually because we can't say yes, it's like driving the business forward to actually focus on accessibility, because that person that reaches out, that customer that's reaching out is saying you have to say yes, or we are not going to adopt your product, what have you. And so I think that it's an interesting, me as an accessibility professional, I don't think that we can ever check that box off. But at the same time, it's what's driving the business. It's what's driving the business to actually like put resourcing behind accessibility initiatives. I'm not sure if anyone, I feel like that wasn't a fully fledged thought or if people were following, but
Crystal, so speaking in regards to my county specifically, we were searching for a new CMS vendor. So basically it's coming to us already bought, and that's kind of where we were looking at it as, okay, checking the box. And that's one of the questions, that we ask: how accessible is your CMS for our county? And this is what we're looking for. And we just get, yes, we are compliant with, but there's nothing in regards to what you're supplying to us or what you're giving us. With our website that we're currently separating from, they just had that they were WCAG 2.0 compliant. And then once these legislation rules came out, it's like, okay, now you're not, we need these to be updated. And, for them saying, oh, yes, we are, now they're refusing to meet those standards. And like I'd mentioned when I introduced myself, navigation alone is difficult on that page. So as mentioned before, you're starting with page 1 and it's broken. And here I'm just fixing the content within our website. So how beneficial is that to an individual that's having a problem just even stepping foot onto our website page? So we have that issue finding any type of, product that's out there, having to know where to even, having what check marks do we ask them when we go to them. So we know that we're at least on some type of solid ground for accessibility.
And
And I'll just do a time check. I think we're 30 minutes out and we should spend a little bit at the end talking about what we want to talk about in the next session, if you're willing to do that.
Okay. I think the thing I was gonna say is being 30 minutes out, and I wonder if Crystal would just, maybe this is a good time for us to transition
to our third question, because this is frequently the response I hear from CMS vendors, is that, don't worry, and I'll get to read the question in just a second, but don't worry too much about, let's say it's a content management system and the editing environment is not super accessible, like literally editing text, right? And I say, go read ATAG, go follow ATAG. ATAG's wonderful and doesn't get enough recognition. But I think that it's also to say, what they come back with is, don't worry, we're fixing our design system and it's going to be mobile responsive and it's going to be on brand and it's going to be better. And so we actually don't want to fix the editor now because our team's over there working on this really cool new thing. And in 6 months you go back, right? Like, no, we're working on our design system and we actually rethought it, and we're actually going to go down to atomic components. And so we're actually going to talk about what is an edit field, and then we're going to talk about what's a label, and then we're going to start to put them together. And then we'll get to a rich text editor. And then a new exec comes in and is like, wait, what? You're not actually building things we're using? Never mind. Right? Moving on. And so then that project gets killed. And so I wonder, that said, right, all that's very, very me-centric. From the company's perspective, does it make sense to go fix a bunch of stuff that's out there today, knowing it's going to be replaced at some point soon, with air quotes around the word soon? So the question we put up is, with so many teams focused on design systems, should we see these as such a panacea for accessibility, when that means users won't see the effects for years and struggle through inaccessible experiences in the meantime? So how do we balance those competing needs? Oh, who needed the mic? Is this one working?
It was just.
Oh.
Okay, forgive me. Long story short, there's no reason why the process of building accessible products should take weeks or years. The whole feedback cycle, what user experience means that as you're building something, you are, taking in feedback, you're ideally have the opportunity to A/B test and, with the wide range of users. Yes. There can be a lag from discovery to fixing, but there need not be. And that's the consideration, is that tech debt, accessibility is seen as like sort of backlog, old tech debt, when a lot of it is current issues, that impact things at multiple levels, right? So you're trying to take incremental steps forward as you're building, whether you're building a CMS tool, whether you're building, digital products. The consideration is the same. So ensuring that feedback, that you can identify that the work that you're doing is actually moving you towards the metrics that you're setting in terms of usability, in terms of accessibility, and closer to compliance, whatever it is. You want a cleaner VPAT, whatever it is, right? So such that those measures for accessibility are included in the definition of done as you iterate through what you're up to, I think.
Yes, what I'm hearing you say really about it, because the flaw is the design system is sort of this, we're gonna go off and do a thing. We're gonna build a design system. Instead of, we're gonna build things that we can use today. And we're gonna iterate through that and store our findings in the design. Kind of becomes a project with a life of its own, rather than actually trying to meet the need that it's set out to solve.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Okay.
Yep.
So.
I used to work with Scottish Government, spent a long time working with procurement and accessibility, and talking with organisations and trying to work through the challenge of getting a content management system that's accessible. And the one truth that I got to was that they're all lying to me. And when they talk about creating a design that's going to solve the accessibility, they're still lying. I cannot help but feel it's like, well, you're the organization that created a product that's inaccessible. You think you're going to be able to create a design system that's accessible, the accessibility problems that you in the first place. Sorry, but you're lying to me. And I just don't, I mean, design system, whatever, it's just fix the bleeding problems. And I think that's the thing. It's like, if these are critical issues, fix them. The design system is not the way to do that. Fixing problems is the way to do that. Design system and down the road, bother to fix the problem now.
Yeah.
Monica.
I think that I'm getting an agreement at some point.
So with the accessible community, we try to build everything we do accessible from scratch. And we aren't always successful. We started on one of the content management systems that said it was accessible, and one day it didn't update, it didn't our all for our entire site. So that was a little painful. So we moved to custom development, and in doing custom development, we took what we had and overlaid it. So that worked. We took what we had, we fixed it in production, and then moved it to our design. We went the other direction. So we would fix something, pick a component, make a decision, say this component now is really phenomenal experience, and then plug that into our design system versus going the other way. UX design person, I'm twitchy about that, but it has been working well. Adding that to the conversation.
You want to name your design system, your CMS?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. Monica, I'm trying to understand the question a little bit, because where I worked, we built a design system internally, and that was used to build the applications. But the progress on building the applications never stopped waiting for the design system. And to me, this question is somehow a question of process. That's a broken process, that if you're waiting for years to update your application, then, you're not doing any agile, you're setting your business back. So I'm struggling with understanding your question, I think, because a design system is a mechanism that people will use to build an application, and saying I'm waiting for the design system, then have you stopped development? The other part I'm understanding in terms of old tech debt is we have a new version coming. That's more how I'm reading this, and the new version will fix something. To me, that also becomes a question in procurement. What is happening in your new system? How are you going to fix it? But neither of these things should stop development teams from fixing bugs and fixing issues. So anyway, so that's just how I'm thinking about it is, what do we do about old systems? When do those things need to come into conformance? Is that a regulatory issue, or is that an adoption of standards, or both?
Well, we agree, right? That
It doesn't make a lot of sense, and yet this question comes as a result of dozens of conversations with companies trying to sell to me, and companies that are trying to sell to get our help selling to their customers to show their accessibility. This is what's happening. And whether it's a design system, or it's the new version, or it's the next gen, or whatever, right?
there is an accessibility work being done to tackle tech debt. Instead, it's rip out that whole thing and replace the experience. And until we replace the experience, we're not actually solving.
Natalie. Yes. Oh, I was gonna piggyback on what was said earlier, which is that they are lying to you. And that, as my whole career is in building things. But
I think it's important for the folks, you know, evaluating and doing procurement to get a little bit more savvy in the ways that they address or interact with product teams about their products so that they can't be so easily snowed. And so that their, you know, threats have a little bit more teeth, because whether or not you will buy something is a threat. You know, like it should be leveraged as such. Yeah. Oh, I don't know who's next.
Yeah. Sorry, we were just chatting about the timing to make sure that we'd had time to kind of go through some of the items that Randy's been writing down and that we want to talk about before the next section. But I think we've got Randy. Right?
Yeah, right. I'm handing it to you.
Was it Randy?
Yeah.
Are you sure? Okay.
And maybe one more after that, and then we'll.
Try and find the mic. Where's the little mic? But
yeah.
There doesn't seem to be a microphone piece.
Yeah,
The sponge fell off of it. Okay, no problem. I'm going to say something a little controversial here, maybe, but I've been on development teams who have been handed a design system. This is Carbon, right? And said, "Thou shalt use this." The general manager says, "Thou shalt use this." We did our best. We didn't build up a lot of tech debt. And we had to make some changes to the system, but we contributed it back to open source. So please don't kill the development teams all the time. Sometimes you're forced to use something, you make the best of it and you fix it at the same time. So I'm just urging people to also take that perspective. You don't always get a choice. Now, at the same time, I didn't say, oh, well, when Carbon fixes this in 15 years, we'll do it. So you build it back into the system, but you know, I urge you to also consider, and obviously I'm as steeped in accessibility as everybody is here, right? But if a general manager tells me I've got to use a certain system, there's some latitude that's to be given to that. If I wanted to keep my job, of course.
Hold on to the mic, because after Pina, we're gonna ask you to read some of the.
Yeah, I'll bring the mic over to you.
Okay. I'll pin it to myself. I don't have as much hands.
I again, just listening to the question, there's another point that I think that might solve it a little bit too, is what about these legacy systems that we have,
Yeah.
right? We never talk enough about them, and how do we mitigate those situations? Companies, governments have invested in these systems. They live for 10 decades, in some cases decades. Governments, I know I've had some systems since the 1970s, not lying there.
No.
So I think we have to be really, also be realistic that there are situations where these systems do exist. And we've got to figure out, you know, how do we help companies deal with accessibility in those situations, because there is no fast fix. There is no fix to developer. That code doesn't exist anymore. They're using those systems for a number of reasons. We can't, you know, we can urge them to change. We're talking about millions of dollars. You know, it's a big decision, but in the meantime, what do we do to, you know, make sure that experience is remediated and that, you know, people actually can use these systems. So just as something to keep also in the back of our mind.
I think for the follow-up. Yeah. No, go ahead. I think that one.
Oh, I was just gonna say that a lot of those legacy systems have interfaces that are more new, right? And the mechanisms for how that works. So it really, what you're advocating for is again, we're talking about the experience. You know, like nobody needs to know that you're cobbled together with duct tape and COBOL. What you're presenting, and you know, to your customers should be a modern, accessible interface. Yeah, and I think that's what, you know, the point of Section 508 and 504. I think that's the point.
Right, I think we're gonna move down to a little bit of wrap up time. And we'll start with Brandy. You want to give us some of our action items and any of our parking lot items?
There's a bunch of parking lot items. So the action items I have for now are think on how to make WCAG success criteria more end-to-end. Consider the whole picture end-to-end flow sort of thing. Ensure legal obligation of producers of tech systems is how I wrote it, to provide equal access to users. Don't just delegate to the AT folks. Revisit basing the WCAG 3.0 on building standards. So those are the 3 action items that I took. If you have more, I can add them.
Any others that you heard that we could? That's, I'd say go on.
Okay.
Good job, sir.
Yeah. I tend to be the parking lots get a little bit more wordy, so I'll try to skim them. Don't call it progress over perfection, call it progress toward tangible outcomes over perfection. It's important to have community validate progress. How much user testing is a tricky question. How much user testing is enough? So be careful about just basing things on user testing. Where do you start with working like somebody like a CMS vendor? Design system should not be a gate. And then another thing about procurement education, I wrote the same thing twice. And more stuff on should we be okay with teams just, using the designing system as an excuse? No. So there's a bunch of commentary on that. And that is it. Parking lot. Yep. And that's all I have. Yeah. Do we have others? Yep.
Parking lot item of where we want to go to find community. Space because responsible with AI work. How to bring along the open source community in AI work.
Any perfect bullets or anything, Rochelle, where we can fix this.
Around using AI, anything else we challenge to people who are here. Well, I'll have to take a look. Before the role play. How did that go?
The role play?
Yeah.
It will help. I don't remember now what we were talking about.
You're not bringing a mic.
I think we're talking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
My bad.
I think we're talking about when we broke into groups. Is that what you're asking, Sharon?
Yeah, because
Yeah.
I believe at the end of the day, and I missed that, and I wondered if sometimes with role plays, you'll get that kind of stuff that goes to the parking lot.
Right, so that's Monica, that's your session, and it's those parking lots and those takeaways from that group. That did you have them, Monica? Because I can't remember off the top of my head. But basically, I think this was about roles, responsibilities. I think we spoke about quite a bit of that. Are there career jobs? Very similarly, we spoke with Carl raised. We talked about the whole conversation around what will job descriptions look like in 2035. I think that was one of the questions that we had in the role. And some of the feedback on that was that our role will need to change more as strategists. And really, also coaching, I think it was that came up in that workshop.
Yep. Articulating visions and roadmaps and specs and leadership. I have to go back.
Off and more sort of, guidance to organizations.
versus what a lot of us are doing today. And it's because of some of the automation and some of the changes that are happening with the tools getting better as well.
Yeah, and it's Monica speaking. I have a mic, thanks. We had a different scribe, and so I just need to go back and see exactly where he marked all of our stuff. I think it might be in a different file. So it's not where you think it is or where I thought it was.
I remember, but I think
So of some of the issues that you've just heard right now, are there ones that you would like to see addressed in the next session? I saw a lot of nods, including mine, on how to engage open source community in AI.
Yep.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, the true open source community.
Yeah.
Open.
Oh, well, that's. Any others?
This is Rochelle. Can we add to that maybe, how could we help accessibility professionals enter into AI? So a kind of a joint partnership of that. How do we get it open source and how do we help people new to it move into it?
Actually,
there's already an action that came out of that discussion in that we're looking at the potential of revisiting ATAG, so accessible authoring and authoring tools that are accessible. So AI-based authoring tools. So I'm in the middle of negotiating with both the EU and Canada to create a free and open standard to that effect. So I just spoke with Etsy and the ASC, and I've already spoken to Sean. So that's which is one of the. I mean, that was the intent of these, that we would actually have things that come out of it or come out of the discussion. So look, hopefully there will be volunteers to help. Jean, I'll send you the terms of reference.
Anything else?
ATAG.
Yeah.
No.
ATAG for AI tools, I think is what, oh, sorry, I was just repeating.
Yeah.
AI authoring tool accessibility guidelines. Yeah.
Oh, I don't want to deal with that acronym.
Yeah.
So I think we are done for the day, for this section. And we're like, unless there's something else that anybody wants to say in wrapping up, or Corb, is there anything you wanted to add?
Appreciate everybody being here.
Yeah, I'm grateful for the conversation. Grateful for the conversation around all the things that we talked on today. And I think the good news is that for me, I take from this that there are a lot of opportunities that we can all agree on about how we need to move forward. And I'm super excited that we have the space to have these kinds of conversations instead of typical conference conversations that are, here's an idea, a very narrow idea, but really get a chance to connect with each of you. So thank you for participating.
And somebody was saying, you'll get a survey of.
Please take the survey.